Good morning, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. I don't know if you can tell, but I have hearts all over my sweater. But I like Valentine's Day this year. I just got married, so I'm trying to keep it all in place. But I'm excited to be here with you all this morning. Um, I'm with the People's Resource Center. As Matt said, I manage our job assistance program. PRC has been in DuPage County since 1975. All of our resources are free to any resident of DuPage County at no charge. So if there, and I will go through kind of additional services. So if there's something that I talk about, if you're interested in our job assistance program or any other assistance that PRC has to offer, please feel free to reach out to me directly and I can connect you with resources. So for this virtual workshop, I would ask that you just mute yourself. There will be time at the end to answer any questions you might have. If you have an immediate question, feel free to use the chat function. I may not be able to necessarily respond to you immediately, but I will respond to you near the end. If you are not familiar with the People's Resource Center, as I mentioned, we've been around since 1975. We're our 50th anniversary this year, actually. We have a food pantry in Wheaton and in Westmont. We do adult learning and literacy. So if somebody is studying for their citizenship exam, their GED, they want to learn English, they can connect with one of our tutors or one of our conversation circles for that. We have an art studio with a kiln with classes for adults and children at both of our locations. We have a clothes closet. I also have professional clothes for women, access specifically to clothes for women. So if you're a woman on the call and you need a professional outfit for work, and you don't have one, please let me know and I can connect you to Poised for Success. PRC also does computer training and access. So if you need a computer for school or work, or you'd like to be certified in Microsoft Office or Excel, we have classes from everything to how do I turn my computer on to, again, being certified as a specialist. We have a really robust social services department that can help with everything from utility assistance, rental assistance. They can give you medical referrals, and anything that you need, we can either help you with or we can refer you out for. And then, as I mentioned, I manage our job search assistance program. So our main focus is on one-to-one job coaching. And what does that look like? Everybody on this call is in a different place in their job search. Our goal is to help you get to whatever your point B is, and that's going to look different for every person. And so we do that through coaching. We help you kind of figure out what is your plan, how are you networking. We connect you with other local resources like Matt to just kind of get you where you need to go in terms of your job search. We also have an online job board that is free to access. You don't have to be a member of PRC to see our job board. And I do just kind of want to let you know that PRC and the Wheaton Library will have our 10th annual career fair on March 13th. You can find more information out on our website. We'll have over 30 employers. A lot of good government employers will be there. There's a wide range of employers. So I highly recommend stopping by the fair on March 13th. It's from 10 to 2 at the Wheaton Public Library. Multiple people got hired out of the event last year. And this
One of the volunteers from the jobs program.
And this year we're expecting a similar turnout and a similar amount of people. So last year we had about 400 people attend. There's also workshops. So there's workshops for our jobs program for computer training. So it's a really fun event. If you're still kind of in your job search in a month, feel free to stop by. So you are here for Mastering the Phone in Virtual Interview. If there are specific questions about like phone and virtual interviews, you can feel free to ask me near the end. So how do you kind of master the phone in virtual interview? So both of those types of interviews, they're a little bit different. So a phone interview usually is a screening interview. But you should always ask the interviewer for, what's their phone number or email address when they reach out to you. If they call you and say, hey, I'd like to set up a phone or a virtual interview with you. If they don't give you that information, always kind of make sure that you get that information from them. It seems pretty basic, but sometimes there can be a gap, or if you've set up a virtual interview and you have an issue with connection, then you can give them a call. You want to identify the employer's main objective of a phone or virtual interview, and they are different. We'll get into that. You're going to learn typical questions that are commonly asked, how to prepare yourself for this type of interview. And then the tell me about yourself question, which is really important, and everybody struggles with this. Tends to be the first question that everybody gets asked in an interview, and everybody kind of struggles. So we'll go through how do you answer that question. So with phone and virtual interviews can feel different and very stressful. So phone interviews tend to happen with HR departments. Usually somebody that's like maybe an HR generalist that's doing screening questions. They're not necessarily the hiring manager. They tend to be shorter. So if you're doing an initial phone interview with somebody, it's usually somebody that has a set of questions that they are asking you based on the requirements for the hiring manager. And it could be really specific to things that the hiring manager needs to know that you have in order to continue to like a virtual interview or to a face-to-face interview. And so they tend to be a little different. You're still going to get questions. Every interview, you're going to get a question, even if you've been interviewing with the same person. They're probably going to ask you some version of "Tell me about yourself." And that question is the easiest way to answer that question is to think about how would you respond to if somebody said, "Well, why are you in this room right now and you could be doing anything anywhere? Why are you on this phone call or why are you on this virtual Zoom call?" And so you normally want to talk about and tell me about yourself. How do you um, what value are you bringing to the company? Why are you interested in the company and kind of what's your passion, right? So who are you in a 30-second nutshell is generally how they're going to ask you those questions. So when you're doing, and this happens a lot. So when you're doing a phone or virtual interview, this seems really basic, but when I've talked to our HR department, they have told me they have done multiple phone interviews with people like in their car that are like on their way to the grocery store. Like you want to make sure that everything works. You want to make sure that you're in a quiet place. You want to make sure that you're prepared. I always tell clients, treat a phone or virtual interview the same as you would if you were going in person, right? So, you want to get dressed up. You want to make sure that you're prepared. You want to make sure that you have answers to basic questions. So, phone interviews, again, they tend to be shorter. Virtual interviews can be similar. If a virtual interview is the first interview, they can be similar. But if it's like an hour, it's probably similar to treat it as you would an in-person interview. The nice part with a virtual interview is you can have all of your notes around you. You can put sticky notes up. You can have your resume right by you. So you can be a little bit more prepared. I actually like virtual interviews because I can have all of my notes around me and be as prepared as I want versus if I'm going in person and maybe I have to bring an index card or try to remember everything. So virtual interviews can be important. Make sure that you check your internet connection. So a lot of libraries, including Matt's library, they have access to kind of Wi-Fi, in their parking lots, but they can also set you up with like rooms and spaces in the library for you to do a virtual interview. You want to test your sound. You want to make sure that it works. You want to turn off any notifications on your desktop or phone. The last thing you want is to be on a phone interview or a virtual interview and all you hear is ding, ding, ding from your social media accounts. You want to check your web camera display, even if you know it works. Always just check it and make sure that it's kind of at eye level. So when you look at a camera, it makes somebody feel like you're making eye contact with them. And I always put a sticker right by my camera that says smile when I'm doing an interview so that I smile so that the interviewer feels that I'm engaged with them. And you want to make sure that the lighting is in front of you, not behind you, because if it's behind you, you're going to be blown out. They're just going to see kind of a shadow line. So you need to make sure that the lighting is behind the camera, it's in front of you. And I always suggest practicing, right? Practice for a phone interview, practice for a virtual interview. You want to be ready. You don't want to be worried that you don't have the technology ready or that you're not set up with an appropriate space to do either of these interviews. Again, appropriate location. Choose a generic background. Just as much as you want to kind of avoid bias in an in-person interview, you want to avoid bias in a phone or virtual interview. So that's why you want to pick somewhere quiet. If you have children in their home, you don't want the reason someone doesn't hire you because they think you're overly committed with your family or because they see something in the background of your virtual interview. You don't want it to be one of those like fun backgrounds that people do when they're on virtual calls. It can be distracting to the person interviewing you. So you want it to be kind of plain, not a lot of information that you want it to look professional in the background. And always be kind of framed from the waist up. I think we've seen those commercials where maybe somebody was on a Zoom interview and they weren't wearing pants and their camera fell. So always be fully dressed, even on a virtual interview. You never know what's going to happen. If you don't know how to use Zoom, I assume everybody on this call knows how to do that. So, but always again, practice, especially if it's a different platform or a different like entryway that you're not used to, just practice with another person. Dress professionally, both for virtual interviews and for phone interviews. So, the same as you would in an in-person interview, people are going to make assessments about you pretty quickly. So you want to dress professionally. You want to wear a blouse or a shirt that's professional, maybe a suit jacket. Just depends on what industry you're going into. Minimize jewelry, piercings, or tattoos. Again, that can vary depending on your industry. Make sure that there's nothing in your teeth, that you're not chewing gum, that you don't have food. Now, it's okay to have water with you if it's a longer interview, right? If you're on a virtual call and you think, oh, I'm going to be really thirsty, I think water can be really helpful because if somebody asks you a question that you're not prepared for and you need a second, you can take a sip of water, think about it, and then respond. Water can also help you slow down. So I tend to talk fast if I'm nervous, so I always have water with me to try to slow me down when I'm speaking. And the same thing, these are just some tips, right? They might seem a little outdated, but I always think it's better to be a little overdressed than underdressed for an interview. The last thing you want is to feel dressed for an interview and be underdressed. So I had a friend, he's a vice president of technology at a bank, and he was interviewing somebody for a position, and they were wearing a baseball cap, a flannel, and they were petting their cat the whole time during this virtual interview. You don't want to do that, right? It looks like you're not engaged, you're not interested, and that it's not important to you. So you do always want to treat them as professionally again as you would if you were going in person. Body language is important. So even on the phone, I worked for the KOA in Alaska for a while, and they would always say, answer with a smile, which always irritated me. But it's true. If you smile over the phone, it's going to make you feel happier, but people are going to hear that. So when you're on, remind yourself to smile. Smiling actually helps calm you down, and actually can help convey in your tone, in the way that you speak, positivity and engagement. And that can be really important. So practice your body language. If you move your hands a lot, if you're fidget a lot and you're afraid that's going to show up in a virtual call, you do want to practice that, and just kind of be aware of, any movements that you do. That's why it's important, again, to practice with someone. Maybe you say a lot and you don't realize it, and someone else can let you know, hey, do you know that you say? So all of these things you need to practice. Interviews are not something that we do normally, but again, practicing all of these things, practicing posture. If you lean forward in a virtual interview, it shows engagement, right? It shows that you're interested and invested in what the other person is saying. So all of these things that you can do, if it doesn't come naturally to you, that's okay. Again, minimize gesturing. Nod at certain points. Again, I think it's always good to have a sticky note that tells you to smile, right? Especially if you get nervous. It just makes you seem more approachable to anybody that's interviewing you. If things go wrong, and they sometimes do. I had a friend that she just did an interview and nothing worked, right? And she had practiced. So if your video or audio stops working, that's why you have the contact information for the person that's interviewing you. If your internet connection is lost, ask if you can complete the interview over the phone. If your phone connection is lost, if something strange happens, send them an email. People understand that things happen, so they may be willing to reschedule. If noise interrupts the conversation, you're at home and something happens, just apologize. Ask if you can mute for a few minutes until the noise goes away. The same thing if somebody accidentally enters the room unexpectedly, just apologize, turn off the camera for a moment and deal with that situation. The more professional, and unrattled you can seem in handling these interruptions, the better that's going to go for you. Now, that can be a little overwhelming, but people understand, right? People understand that things happen. So you just want to handle them as professionally and concisely, and quickly as you can. You kind of always want to make sure that you have a list of questions in advance that you want to ask the person that's interviewing you. And again, so you want to know the type of interview that you're doing. So if you're doing a phone interview, an initial phone interview, again, those are basically screening questions from probably an HR manager, HR generalist, probably not the hiring manager, possibly the hiring manager. But that's why you kind of want to know who am I speaking with, and kind of where is this in terms of the hiring process, right? And they might tell you you'll be doing the phone interview with the hiring manager. It's always fair to ask what someone's position is. And so you kind of want to know, okay, what questions are they going to ask? So if it's a basic screening question interview, they're probably going to ask you, tell me about yourself. What do you know about the company? What are you passionate about? Why are you interested in the position? And any specific skills related to that position, if it's particularly a screening interview. So those are all things that you can practice. You never want to answer someone when they say, "What do you know about the company?" and you go, "I don't know a lot," right? You want to have looked at their website. You want to have some questions about maybe what their mission is, or what they say their goals are, or any projects that they're working on. That shows that the person that's that's interviewing you, that you're interested in, that you've paid attention, that you've done a little bit of research. Anytime that you can do that, it's always going to be to your benefit during any interview. But you're generally going to get those types of questions in a screening interview. You want to have the job description available for you. You want your resume, the resume that you submitted for the job description, and any notes available, and kind of key highlighted things that you like. If there's questions that you need to know, maybe it's particularly in a screening interview. If you need to know kind of what the schedule is, or there's specific things like that, they may ask you in a screening interview about salary. What is your salary requirement? If they haven't listed that in the job description, I generally recommend to clients not to answer that question, or to answer the question in terms of, I want to be paid fairly for the value I bring to the company. The person interviewing you already knows what they're willing to pay you. So they are looking to see, do you fit within that range, and are you more affordable than maybe another candidate? It's always good to know kind of what that number is. And you can do your research through things like Indeed, Glassdoor, the ONET online. So you can do research and kind of figure out what a range for the position is, so you know where you should comfortably stand. But they always kind of know what that is. And you should always have questions you want to ask. So at any point that you are given an opportunity to ask interview questions during any interview, always ask a question. Because I guarantee you, you don't know everything about the company or the position. And make sure that you ask good questions. That can be what differentiates you from another candidate that they phone screen, right? They will see and judge you based on, well, what kinds of questions did you ask? What were you interested in? What was your main priority in engaging in that interview? Now, if you're doing like a longer virtual interview, that's not an initial screening interview, you want to treat that as you would an in-person interview, and be ready with, your behavioral interview questions. You want to, practice those. If you've heard of like SART, or the STAR method, you kind of want to practice how do you answer some of those questions. And you want to be prepared based on the requirements of the job description to kind of respond to any questions they may ask during a virtual interview. So if it's a longer virtual interview, you can just treat it in preparation the same as you would as an in-person interview. Your notes should be off camera, possibly, on a stand at eye level so that you're not necessarily glancing down all the time. But it's also okay to let the interviewer know, hey, I'm taking notes, or hey, I brought notes with me. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And when I've interviewed people and I see that they've come in with notes or that they're taking notes during the interview, I know that that means that this position and what they're doing right now is important to them, and they want to make sure that they're remembering important details. Again, have the questions that you want to ask the employer. Um, and think of it, they're trying to figure you out and you're trying to figure them out. So you may go through the initial phone screening interview or an initial Zoom interview and realize I don't think this is a good fit for me, and that's okay, right? So give yourself kind of a little bit of time, and give yourself a little space to explore in the interview process. Do I want this position, and do they offer me what I want? Common phone and virtual interview questions. So they're going to kind of check, like I said, did you do any homework? So you should research the company and you should have a kind of firm understanding of what the company's history is or what they're trying to accomplish. And if you're not clear, if it's not clear, like let's say you're interviewing for a company and they're going through a big transition or they just did a merger and you're not really sure kind of where things stand now, or you find out something unusual about the company, you can always ask that in an interview, like, hey, I realize you guys just went through a merger. Kind of what does that mean for your company now, or something like that. But that again shows you did some research. Um, Again, they could ask about salary. Salary negotiation generally isn't discussed in first initial interviews, but they will ask kind of what your salary range is. And again, as I mentioned, I wouldn't necessarily answer the question directly, but I would have a sense of what your range is. You have to have a sincere interest in the company, or you have to have the ability to fake a sincere interest in a company. Everybody knows that people are looking for jobs because they need employment, they need money, they're trying to thrive and survive in their lives. But you need to answer a question in terms of how are your skills and accomplishments going to benefit the company, right? What value are you going to bring? You should have specific skills and qualifications that fit the role, and you should share them and have examples. So every bullet point on your resume, somebody could ask you about that. You should have a story that you are prepared to kind of share to back up that bullet point, whatever that is. Um, Appearing distracted. This seems kind of straightforward, but it happens more than you would know. And so again, you want to avoid interruptions. You need to have kind of 100% focus, and treat this seriously, even if it is a phone interview that you're going to end up doing in your car. You need to treat it as the same as you would if you're walking through the door. Um, be somewhere quiet. If you get called, generally you shouldn't get called out of the blue for a phone interview, but you can always, schedule it. It should be a scheduled time that works for both you and the person that's interviewing you. Um, and so if somebody does call you out of the blue, you can always ask for a phone number and give them a call back. Um, Not understanding who is contacting you and why before the call. Like, seems kind of silly, but it happens, especially in the days of quick applying on Indeed. Um, so that's part of why I always recommend to clients is be really organized in everything that you've applied for, right? What did you apply for? When did you apply for? What was the position title? I always recommend like spreadsheets, or I know Indeed will keep track of all of those things for you. So that when somebody does call you from, a company, you can easily pull up that information and you know who's contacting you and why. And then you can schedule, that phone interview or that virtual interview and go back to your notes and your organizational your spreadsheet and kind of do that research because you have all of that information together. I also always recommend saving a copy of the resume or that you have that you've submitted for it, but then also the job description. So save that job description somewhere because the last thing you want to do is, oh, I applied for this position and now I have an interview and I can't find the job description somewhere. So you can always ask the HR person to resend it to you, but it's always better to have a copy on your own. Um, Again, understand who's interviewing you. Name, title, email of the caller. Again, initial screening interview is about 15 to 20 minutes. If it's hiring manager or, it's their kind of initial interview with you, it could be longer. And they're going to generally be more interested in determining your technical skills if they're a match for the position. So they may ask you specifically about something that you've listed on your resume that they think is going to match that position. You need to prepare specific responses. So I see this a lot on resumes of people having really general things on their resume. I had somebody that said that they were exceptional at improvising, but I didn't understand what that meant. So I asked for an example. They had one. It wasn't necessarily a very specific example. So you want to have specific examples, specific accomplishments that you can speak to, and you want to think in terms of metrics, and be as fully prepared as you can. So you want to be general but not vague. So you want to have, how much was the budget that you managed? How many team members did you work on? Do you have metrics involved with your job? And let's say you don't have a lot of metrics involved with your job, but you can still speak to a good example would be if someone says they're a team player, you could speak to, well, I've worked on kind of multi-generational, multicultural teams across multiple locations, right? That's very different than just saying you're a team player, right? So think about how you're going to tell your story in specifics so that the person interviewing you understands what you're communicating. So you want to prepare and rehearse responses to typical questions. You can Google them. You can look at the job description to kind of gauge what they're going to ask you, and kind of know what your accomplishments are. I tell people when they go into an interview, you want to have a plan of what you want to communicate. And you also need to know, what do you need to know to go forward, to not go forward, or to go, maybe I'm not sure, I want to explore a next step, right? And so the more that you have that plan of what you want to communicate and what you want to learn, the more confident you're going to feel in a phone or virtual interview or any interview in general. Communication skills, these are hard. Not everybody is great at them, but you do need to practice that your responses are succinct. People tend to over communicate, especially when they're nervous. So you want to practice providing clear, concise, kind of crisp answers, and then pause. Take a breath. Because we can kind of keep going and going and going. And as I mentioned before, there's like situation, action, result. I like situation, action, result, and tie-in, which is about kind of what's the value you're going to bring to the company. But you want your responses, if you're thinking about practicing responses, you want your responses to be 2 to 3 sentences. You don't want them to be longer than that because if you've given enough information, the interviewer can then ask a follow-up question. Tell me more about that. What does that mean? I've never heard of that type of project. Can you explain that? Now you're having a conversation. Instead of if you overload them with information that they don't necessarily understand, they've kind of zoned out. So you want to give them enough information that you've answered the question sufficiently, and that they can ask responsive questions if they're interested. Being confident in communication is going to help a lot. So again, focus on smiling, focus on enthusiasm. Why are you interested in the position? What are you passionate about? Can you find something that you're passionate about in the position? If you're in a phone interview, I always recommend if you can to stand or to sit kind of firmly, because it's going to enhance the quality of your voice, and it's going to help you to breathe properly. So if you can stand during a phone interview, that's going to help. If you can't, that's okay. And then I mean, even on a phone interview, I dress up as if I'm going in person because it just makes me feel more confident, more professional, and more ready. You do have to communicate interest. Um, and so again, you communicate interest through having questions prepared. And you do need to communicate. If you are really interested in a position, you need to explicitly communicate that towards the end of the interview. Even a phone screening. Hey, this sounds really interesting to me. I would be super interested in whatever next steps there are. I look forward to hearing from you, right? Because don't assume that someone is going to know your interest until you communicate that to them. So if you're interested, communicate that and find a way to communicate that in a way that feels authentic to you. Now, if you interview with somebody and you don't want to do that position, just say thank you so much for your time. And if they call you back, you can deal with that then. But if you are interested, let them know. Um, send a thank you note. An email note is fine, even for a phone interview, right? Even for a phone screen. Send a short thank you email to the person that spent 20 minutes talking to you, communicating kind of if you're interested and any questions you have that follow up with that is always going to be helpful. Because again, that communicates confidence and interest. Don't ever do a phone interview or virtual interview that is not scheduled, that you're not prepared for. So you can always ask to reschedule or to call back. To me, that would be a red flag, right? So if an employer calls you and they want to interview you right then, that would be a red flag to me. So I would always kind of avoid that. You should also make sure that your outgoing voicemail message is professional and that your voicemail box is not full. So I've called multiple people and their voicemail box is full or their voicemail is not professional. And it can even be, hi, you've reached this number. That's okay, but you need to be able to have an accessible voicemail that an employer can leave a message to schedule something with you. And check your messages. So check your messages, your email and voicemail box at least daily, and also check your spam. So sometimes these things, if they're scheduling a virtual interview with you and it's through a platform that maybe you're not familiar with, it might go to your spam. So you always want to kind of check those things. Your voicemail is your first impression to an employer. So, avoid using music, sounding too casual. Family greetings, which I don't think people really do, but I've heard them occasionally. Just stick with something kind of professional, even just your phone number. Again, do your research. And it can be really basic, right? But just kind of knowing, I think always kind of understanding what the mission of an organization is, and every organization has one, is always going to be to your benefit. And then these are just some practice interview questions that you're going to get. So, tell me about yourself, right? Um, that should be about 30 seconds, right? And you do need to practice this. So I always tell people, write out the please tell me about yourself write it all out, then go take a break, have a cup of tea or cup of coffee, come back and then cut it down because it's going to be too long. But you want to practice, how do you tell me about yourself? And again, that's the question of kind of why are you interested in this industry? Kind of what kind of value or accomplishments do you have? And where are you trying to go? Right? That's generally how you answer that question. Why are you interested in this position? Why are you looking for a new job, or why did you leave your last job? So these are kinds of basic questions that you're gonna get that you want to be kind of prepared for. You can, again, also check the job description is always going to have a good answer, a good set of questions that you can kind of gauge, based on the requirements, you can kind of practice. I think, the question you're often going to get is, tell me about a time you had to deal with a conflict on the job. You always want to stay positive. Even if the questions seem like they could be negative, you want your response to always be positive and always to be, in general, growth oriented, or what did you learn? They ask you these questions not to trip you up, but to understand, how do you think and solve a problem? Because often people assume how you've solved a problem in the past is how you're going to solve a problem in the future. So when people ask you questions like, tell me about a time that you went above and beyond the call of duty, they're not trying to trick you. They're just trying to understand how you think. Skills and accomplishments. You should be able to answer this, right? Tell me about a work accomplishment that you're most proud of, right? Um, when were you most satisfied in your job? You may get some of these questions, and you should be able to answer them again in about 2 to 3 sentences, which can give the interviewer the time to ask you questions. I would say within about an hour interview, you're gonna get maybe 8 to 12 questions. And within about a 15 to 20 minute interview, phone screening, you're probably going to get 4 to 5. Again, these are kind of the behavioral interview questions. So they might ask you about a gap in employment. They might ask you about a time that you made a mistake at work. They're just trying to figure out how do you think. So, hopefully this has been helpful to you, that you've checked all of your technologies, that you feel professional, again, prepared, and that you're kind of ready for success in this endeavor with phone and virtual interviews. Does anybody have any questions?